I am Leslie, 63 years old, recently retired after 40 years as a dedicated nurse. I used my entire life savings to purchase a luxury home for my son Thomas and his wife Audrey. Never did I imagine they would betray me so cruelly. The words still echo in my mind. Thanks for the house, but we do not need you now. My heart shattered that day, but what happened 7 days later left me speechless. Before I share this painful journey, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever trusted someone who broke your heart. Your support means everything, as I reveal how my son and his daughter-in-law repaid my lifetime of sacrifice. I was born and raised in a middle-class family in Chicago. My parents taught me the value of hard work and family loyalty. Those values guided me throughout my life, especially in how I raised my son Thomas after my beloved husband Jack passed away. Jack and I had a beautiful marriage. We met in our 20s while I was in nursing school, and he was starting his career as an accountant. We built a comfortable life together, not extravagant, but filled with love. Our greatest joy came in 1989 when Thomas was born. He was such a beautiful baby with his father's eyes and my smile. Those early years were magical. I can still remember Thomas taking his first steps across our living room, his little hands reaching for me, his face lit up with accomplishment. Jack was an amazing father. He would spend hours playing with Thomas, reading him bedtime stories, teaching him to ride a bike. We were a tight-knit family, celebrating every milestone together. Thomas was our world, and we poured all our love and resources into giving him the best life possible. Everything changed when Jack suffered his first heart attack when Thomas was 15. Though he recovered initially, his health began a steady decline. Despite the best treatments available, I lost my beloved husband to heart failure when Thomas was just 18, ready to start college. My world collapsed, but I had to stay strong for our son. I threw myself into my work as a nurse, picking up extra shifts to ensure Thomas could still attend the prestigious university he had been accepted to. Jack had started a college fund, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. I was determined that my son would have every opportunity, regardless of the personal cost to me. Those years were exhausting. I would work 12-hour shifts at the hospital, sometimes back to back, then come home to an empty house. The loneliness was crushing at times, but knowing I was supporting Thomas gave me purpose. We talked on the phone frequently during his first 2 years at university. He would tell me about his architecture classes, his friends, his dreams of designing innovative buildings. I lived vicariously through his experiences, proud of the intelligent, ambitious young man he was becoming. Thomas came home regularly during those early college years. Holidays were special times when we would honor Jack's memory while creating new traditions of our own. I remember one Christmas when Thomas designed and built a beautiful memorial shelf for his father's photographs. It was those moments that reassured me we would always have a special bond. The subtle changes in Thomas began during his junior year of college. His calls became less frequent, his visits shorter and more distracted. At first, I attributed it to the natural process of growing up and becoming independent. I told myself this was healthy, that I should be proud he was building his own life. When he did call, it was often because he needed money for books for rent, for a study abroad program that would look good on his resume. I never hesitated to help. I remortgaged our family home to provide the funds he needed. In my mind, every dollar was an investment in his future, and by extension in our future together as a family. I began to notice that Thomas rarely asked about my life or my work anymore. Conversations became one-sided, with me asking questions about his studies and him giving brief answers before mentioning another financial need. Still, I made excuses for him. He was busy. He was focused on his studies. He was becoming a man. There was one particularly painful moment during his senior year when he called to say he wouldn't be coming home for Thanksgiving. He had the opportunity to spend the holiday with a classmate's family in their vacation home in Aspen. It would be his first chance to network with some influential people in the architecture world. I understood the importance of such connections, but spending the holiday alone was difficult. I volunteered for the Thanksgiving shift at the hospital, so at least I could be around other people. Despite these disappointments, I never doubted Thomas's love for me. I believed that once he graduated and established himself, our relationship would return to the close bond we had shared. He was just busy finding his path. Every parent wants their child to succeed, to build a life even better than their own. I was no different. I kept telling myself that the increasing distance was temporary, that the son who once looked at me with such love and gratitude would return. I held on to memories of the little boy who would crawl into my lap after Jack died, seeking comfort in my arms. That child was still inside the ambitious young man, I was certain of it. When Thomas graduated with honors in architecture, I sat in the audience bursting with pride. All the extra shifts, all the lonely nights, all the financial sacrifices had been worth it to see my son in his cap and gown, ready to take on the world. I imagined Jack watching from above, equally proud of our son. After graduation, Thomas moved back home briefly while looking for his first professional position. Those few months gave me hope that our relationship might be healing. We shared meals, watched movies together, and occasionally he would even ask about my day at the hospital. But I also noticed a growing restlessness in him, an impatience to move on to bigger things than our modest suburban home could offer. When he landed a position at a prestigious architecture firm in the city, I was thrilled for him, but sad to see him go. He moved into a small apartment downtown, close to his new office. I visited occasionally, bringing home cooked meals and small gifts for his new place. He seemed appreciative, but always busy, always rushing to the next meeting or social event. It was around this time that the first troubling signs of Thomas's changing character became impossible to ignore. He began to comment on my clothes, suggesting I should update my wardrobe. He seemed embarrassed by my practical nurse's sensibility. Once, when I arrived at his apartment building in my old but reliable sedan, he asked if I could park a block away next time. His explanation that parking was easier there rang hollow. Yet still I made excuses. He was establishing himself in a new professional world. Image mattered in his field. He would settle into a more authentic version of himself once he felt secure in his career. At least that's what I told myself as I drove home alone, fighting back tears at the growing realization that my son was ashamed of me, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Despite these painful moments, my love for Thomas never wavered. I continued to support him emotionally and financially whenever he needed it. When he called asking for money to buy proper suits for work, I sent it without hesitation. When he needed help with a security deposit for a nicer apartment, I took money from my retirement fund. My friends at the hospital began to question my choices, but I defended Thomas fiercely. He was my only family, my whole world. I couldn't bear to acknowledge the growing evidence that his love for me had become conditional based on what I could provide rather than who I was. I held on to hope that things would change. I told myself that once Thomas felt established and secure, he would remember the values his father and I had taught him. I couldn't have known then how dramatically those hopes would be shattered, or that the worst betrayal was yet to come. Thomas met Audrey during his third year at university. She was studying business management, and they met at a campus fundraising event. Thomas was immediately smitten, describing her as the most beautiful and sophisticated woman he had ever met. When he first mentioned her in our phone calls, his voice would take on a dreamy quality I hadn't heard before. I was happy for him, of course. Every mother wants her son to find love. I looked forward to meeting the woman who had captured my son's heart. That opportunity came during spring break, when Thomas brought Audrey home for the weekend. My first impression of Audrey was mixed. She was undeniably beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, and impeccable makeup. She was polite, complimenting my home and thanking me for hosting her. But there was something in her eyes, a coolness, that never quite warmed even when she smiled. I dismissed my misgivings as simple protectiveness over my son. Audrey came from a wealthy family in Connecticut. Her father was a successful investment banker, and her mother was involved in various charitable organizations, though Audrey described these as primarily social obligations rather than genuine philanthropic interests. During that first visit, Audrey spoke often about her family's vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, the country club memberships, and the private schools she had attended. I noticed how Thomas seemed to shrink slightly in her presence, careful of his words and actions, eager to impress. He had never been particularly materialistic before, but now he apologized to Audrey for the modest nature of our home, explaining that we had focused on his education rather than luxuries. I was hurt by his apparent embarrassment, but said nothing, not wanting to create tension during their visit. Throughout the weekend, Audrey maintained a polite distance. She answered my questions about her studies and family, but never asked about my work or my life. She spent considerable time on her phone texting and checking social media. When I prepared homemade meals that had always been Thomas's favorites, she picked at her food later, suggesting they go out for dinner at an expensive restaurant in town. Thomas immediately agreed, looking apologetic as they left me to eat alone. After they returned to university, Thomas's calls became even less frequent. When we did speak, Audrey was often mentioned as the reason he couldn't come home for visits. There was always some social event with her friends or family that took priority. I began to feel that I was losing my son to a world I couldn't access or understand. The following Christmas, Thomas informed me that he would be spending the holiday with Audrey's family at their winter home in Vale. It would be my first Christmas completely alone since Jack's death. I tried to hide my disappointment, suggesting I might come visit them after the holiday. Thomas's uncomfortable silence told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't invited into this new part of his life. 2 years into their relationship, Thomas called with the news that he and Audrey were engaged. I expressed my happiness for them, though privately, I worried about the growing distance between us. Thomas explained that Audrey's parents would be handling most of the wedding arrangements and costs, as was traditional. When I offered to contribute what I could, he thanked me, but said it wasn't necessary. The unspoken message was clear: my modest financial means had no place in the lavish celebration being planned. The wedding was held at an exclusive country club in Connecticut. I saved for months to buy an appropriate dress and traveled alone for the occasion. Upon arrival, I discovered that my seating assignment was at a back table with distant relatives who barely knew Thomas. Audrey's mother greeted me with cool politeness, introducing me to her friends as Thomas's mother without using my name. Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of my son in his expensive tuxedo, moving comfortably among Audrey's wealthy friends and family, seemingly at home in this world that excluded me. After the wedding, Thomas and Audrey moved into an upscale apartment in the city. I was invited to visit only twice in the first year of their marriage. Each visit was brief and uncomfortable. Audrey would make remarks about the apartment being too small for entertaining properly, clearly indicating that their current living situation was temporary and beneath their aspirations. I noticed that Thomas called only when Audrey was not around, usually during his lunch breaks at work. During one such call, he mentioned casually that Audrey thought it might be better if he focused more on their new family unit, rather than dividing his attention. The implication was clear: I was competition for my son's attention, and Audrey was asserting her priority. Despite this growing alienation, I continued to send birthday and holiday gifts, call regularly, and maintain hope that our relationship could be repaired. I still believed that Thomas had a good heart, underneath the influence of his wife and her family. I refused to give up on my only child, the last living connection to my beloved Jack. The most painful visit came 2 years into their marriage. I had been invited for dinner, a rare occurrence. Throughout the evening, Audrey complained about their apartment, her job, and the difficulty of finding good household help. Thomas nodded sympathetically, occasionally glancing at me as if gauging my reaction. When I mentioned a funny story from the hospital, Audrey interrupted to ask Thomas about an upcoming social event. I was effectively silenced for the remainder of the evening. As I prepared to leave, Audrey mentioned casually that they were considering looking for a house, something more suitable to their status. Thomas added that the housing market was challenging, especially in the desirable neighborhoods where they wanted to live. Neither directly asked for my help, but the conversation seemed choreographed to plant the idea. I left with a heavy heart, wondering if I now had value to them only as a potential financial resource. Back at home, I cried myself to sleep that night. The son I had raised, the boy who had once been so loving and appreciative, now seemed to view me through the lens of what I could provide materially. I wondered what Jack would think of the man our son had become. Would he recognize the kind, sensitive boy we had raised together? Yet even with all these warning signs, I continued to make excuses for Thomas. Perhaps he was simply trying to please his wife. Perhaps he felt trapped between his love for me and his new life. Perhaps deep down, he was still the son who had once looked at me with love and gratitude. I held on to these hopes, even as evidence mounted that Thomas and Audrey saw me primarily as a potential solution to their housing aspirations. I told myself that if I could help them secure the home they wanted, perhaps I could rebuild my relationship with my son. Perhaps I could earn a place in their lives. It was this desperate hope that led me to make the decision that would change everything, a decision I would come to regret deeply. As I approached my 60th birthday, I began to seriously consider retirement. After 40 years of serving others as a nurse, I was tired. The pandemic had been particularly difficult with long hours in protective equipment and the emotional toll of losing patients. I had always imagined retirement as a time to finally rest, perhaps travel a little, and spend more time with family. Of course, in my dreams, that family included Thomas, Audrey, and perhaps grandchildren. Thomas and Audrey had been married for 3 years when they began more openly complaining about their living situation. During one of my rare visits to their apartment, Audrey gave me a tour that felt more like a catalog of grievances. The kitchen was too small for proper entertaining. The closet space was inadequate for her wardrobe. The building's amenities were subpar compared to where her friends lived. Thomas nodded along, adding that the commute to his firm was becoming unbearable in their current location. Then came the moment that would set everything in motion. Audrey casually mentioned a listing she had seen in Brookhaven, an upscale neighborhood known for its excellent schools and exclusive community. She described the house in loving detail: 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a landscaped garden, proximity to the best private schools. Her eyes shone as she spoke of hosting dinner parties and holiday gatherings in such a home. Thomas looked wistful. "It will be years before we can afford something like that," he said. "Maybe a decade." Audrey's face fell, and I saw the brief flash of resentment she directed at my son. That evening, as I drove back to my modest home, I couldn't stop thinking about their situation. I had always intended to leave whatever I had to Thomas after my death. My retirement account had grown steadily over 40 years of careful saving. Jack's life insurance policy, which I had never touched, had accumulated significant interest. And there was the equity in my home, which had appreciated considerably since Jack and I had purchased it early in our marriage. I made an appointment with my financial advisor the following week. She reviewed my assets and confirmed what I already suspected: if I liquidated everything, I could purchase a home in Brookhaven outright, with enough left over for modest living expenses if I continued to work part-time. It would mean sacrificing the retirement I had planned, but wouldn't it be worth it to be close to my son and future grandchildren? My friend Nancy, another nurse nearing retirement, tried to warn me when I shared my plan. "Leslie, think carefully about this," she urged. "Will Thomas and Audrey appreciate such a sacrifice? Or will they simply take it for granted? What guarantees do you have about your own living situation?" I dismissed her concerns. "Thomas is my son," I insisted. Of course he would welcome me into their new home. I imagined a small suite where I could maintain my independence while being available to help with future children. I pictured family dinners, holidays celebrated together, the chance to be a daily presence in my son's life again. I contacted a realtor specializing in the Brookhaven area and began viewing properties. The prices were shocking, easily 3 times what my current home was worth. But I was determined. Each house I viewed, I imagined through Thomas and Audrey's eyes. Would the kitchen meet Audrey's standards? Would the home office be suitable for Thomas when he worked from home? Was the master bedroom luxurious enough? After 2 months of searching, I found it a beautiful colonial on a tree-lined street. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, a landscaped yard with a patio, perfect for entertaining. It was at the very top of my budget, meaning I would need to sell my house and liquidate all of my retirement savings. But it was exactly what Thomas and Audrey had described as their dream home. I called Thomas immediately, trying to contain my excitement. I explained that I had been considering their housing situation and had found a potential solution. I asked if he and Audrey could meet me at the property that weekend. Thomas sounded confused but agreed. The moment they pulled up to the house, I saw the change in their expressions. Audrey's eyes widened, and Thomas looked from the house to me with disbelief. "This is what you wanted to show us?" Audrey asked, her voice higher than normal. I nodded, unable to contain my smile, as I handed them the realtor's brochure. As the realtor gave us a tour, Audrey moved through the rooms like someone in a dream. She ran her hand along the marble countertops, peered into the walk-in closets, exclaimed over the soaking tub in the master bathroom. Thomas followed more quietly occasionally, asking practical questions about the roof and the HVAC system. After the tour, we sat in the backyard while the realtor gave us a few minutes alone. I explained my plan. I would purchase the house outright. Thomas and Audrey would live there, and I would occupy the small guest suite above the garage. I could help with future children handle the cooking and some housekeeping. We would be a family again. I expected joy, gratitude, perhaps even tears. Instead, there was an uncomfortable silence. Thomas and Audrey exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Mom, this is incredibly generous, but are you sure? This would mean spending almost everything you have." I assured him I had thought it through carefully. "This is what family does," I said. "Your father would want this for you. He always dreamed of giving you the best start in life." Audrey spoke next, her voice carefully modulated. "The house is absolutely perfect," she said. "But the guest suite, it is rather small, isn't it? And so close to the main house." She glanced at Thomas again. Thomas cleared his throat. "What Audrey means is, we wouldn't want you to feel obligated to help with childcare or housekeeping. You deserve to enjoy your retirement." I felt a flicker of unease but pushed it aside. I assured them I would respect their privacy and independence. The guest suite would give me my own space while allowing me to be close enough to help when needed. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. The discussion moved to practical matters. Thomas asked about the timing, the closing process, whether there would be any mortgage. I explained that I would be selling my house and using my retirement funds to purchase the Brookhaven house outright. There would be no mortgage, no monthly payment. The house would be completely paid for. Then came the question that should have been a warning sign. Thomas asked hesitantly whose name would be on the deed. I responded without hesitation, his, of course. This was to be his family home, his inheritance simply provided early so that he could enjoy it during my lifetime rather than after I was gone. The relief on Audrey's face was immediate and unmistakable. She reached over to squeeze my hand, her first genuine gesture of warmth toward me in years. "That's so generous, Leslie," she said. "We would be honored." The process moved quickly after that. I sold my house of 30 years, liquidated my retirement accounts paying substantial penalties for early withdrawal, and combined these with Jack's life insurance money. The closing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. During that time, Thomas and Audrey became unusually attentive. They called regularly to discuss paint colors, furniture placement, landscaping preferences. Audrey sent links to interior design websites seeking my opinion on various styles. I was touched by their apparent desire to include me in the decisions, taking it as a sign that we were already becoming a closer family. The day we signed the papers was surreal. I watched as Thomas's name was recorded as the sole owner of the property. The real estate agent congratulated him on his beautiful new home, barely acknowledging my presence, despite the fact that I was the one providing the cashier's check for the full purchase price. Thomas and Audrey beamed, accepting the congratulations, as if they had achieved this milestone through their own efforts. As we left the office, keys in hand, I felt a mixture of emotions: pride in being able to provide this beautiful home for my son, hope that this would mark the beginning of a new, closer relationship, but also a faint anxiety that I couldn't quite name, a whisper of warning that I deliberately ignored. Thomas drove us to the house, our house, where a bottle of champagne waited in the refrigerator. We toasted to new beginnings, to family, to the future. Audrey mentioned hosting a housewarming party the following weekend. I offered to help with the cooking and preparations. Thomas and Audrey exchanged another of those unreadable looks, but agreed that would be lovely. That night, back in the hotel where I was staying temporarily, I allowed myself to dream about the future. I imagined holiday gatherings in the beautiful dining room, grandchildren running through the spacious hallways, evenings spent together on the patio. After years of growing distance, I believed I had found the way back to my son's heart. I had no idea how completely wrong I was, or how soon my dreams would shatter. The week before the housewarming party was filled with activity. I helped Thomas and Audrey move their belongings from their apartment to the new house. They had surprisingly little furniture, as the apartment had been relatively small, so most of the rooms remained empty. Audrey spoke excitedly about ordering custom pieces, designing each room to perfection over time. I noticed that the guest suite above the garage remained completely unfurnished. When I mentioned bringing my bedroom set from my old house, which I had placed in temporary storage, Audrey suggested waiting. "Let's get through the housewarming first," she said. "Then we can think about the guest suite." I spent the day of the party cooking Thomas's favorite dishes, my special lasagna that he had loved since childhood, garlic bread from scratch, a salad with homemade dressing, and his favorite chocolate cake for dessert. I wanted to contribute something meaningful to this important occasion to establish my role in this new household. As I worked in the kitchen, Audrey flitted in and out, making small adjustments to my preparations. She added garnishes I hadn't planned, rearranged the lasagna on serving platters, transferred my homemade salad dressing to an elegant cruet. Each change was presented as an enhancement, but I couldn't help feeling that she was erasing my touch, reclaiming control over even this small contribution. The guests began arriving at 7. Thomas greeted each one at the door, while Audrey gave tours of the house. I stood awkwardly in the kitchen, unsure of my place. These were Thomas and Audrey's friends and colleagues, people I had never met. Young professionals in expensive clothes who looked at me with brief curiosity before moving on to more interesting conversations. One woman approached me in the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand. "You must be Thomas's mother," she said. I nodded, introducing myself. "The house is absolutely gorgeous," she continued. "You must be so proud of what your son has accomplished at such a young age." Before I could respond, could explain that I had purchased the house, Audrey appeared at the woman's side. She guided her away, murmuring something about someone else who was eager to speak with her. I was left alone again, an outsider in the home I had purchased. Throughout the evening, I tried to mingle to find my place among these strangers, but conversations quieted when I approached or shifted to topics that excluded me. I heard snippets about vacation homes, investment opportunities, exclusive restaurants, a world I had never been part of and never would be. I found Thomas in the living room, surrounded by colleagues from his architecture firm. I waited patiently on the periphery of the group, hoping for a moment of his attention. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, I approached him. "The food is a hit," I said, smiling. "Everyone seems to be enjoying themselves." Thomas glanced at me, distracted. "Yeah, it's going well." He looked past me, his attention already elsewhere. "Thanks for helping with the food, Mom. I think Audrey was looking for you earlier, something about dessert." It was a dismissal, polite but clear. I retreated to the kitchen, fighting back tears. This was not how I had imagined this evening, not how I had imagined my place in this new home. I busied myself with serving the chocolate cake, plastering on a smile as guests complimented the dessert, assuming Audrey had made it. By 11, most of the guests had departed. I began cleaning the kitchen, wrapping leftovers, and loading the dishwasher. Thomas and Audrey saw the last few friends out, their laughter echoing in the foyer. I heard the front door close, then their footsteps approaching the kitchen. Audrey entered first, her smile fading as she saw me at the sink. Thomas followed, looking uncomfortable. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before, a sense of something unspoken about to be revealed. "Mom," Thomas began, "we need to talk." His voice was gentle but firm. "Audrey and I have been discussing the living arrangements." I dried my hands on a dish towel, an uneasy feeling growing in my stomach. "I thought we had already settled that," I said. "The guest suite above the garage," Audrey interrupted. "That's what we need to discuss, Leslie." She rarely used my name, usually avoiding addressing me directly whenever possible. "We've been thinking that perhaps the arrangement we discussed isn't the best solution after all." Thomas took over. The thing is, Mom, Audrey, and I are just starting our life together in this new home. We're planning to start a family soon, and we really need our space, our privacy. I felt as if the floor were tilting beneath me. What are you saying? I asked, though I already knew the answer, had perhaps known it subconsciously all along. Audrey's voice was cool and precise. What we're saying, Leslie, is that we appreciate everything you've done. The house is perfect, truly. But we think it would be better if you found your own place to live. Somewhere nearby, perhaps, so you can visit. But not here, not in this house. I looked at Thomas, waiting for him to contradict her, to stand up for me, to honor our understanding. But he merely nodded, avoiding my eyes. You promised, I whispered. We had an agreement. I bought this house for us to live together as a family. Audrey's expression hardened. There was never a formal agreement, Leslie. The house is in Thomas's name as you arranged yourself. We're grateful, of course. But now we need to do what's best for our family. Our immediate family. The blow landed with devastating force. I was not part of their immediate family. I was an outsider, useful for providing a luxury home, but not welcome to share in it. I turned to Thomas, my last hope. Is this really what you want? I asked him. After everything, is this how you want things to be? For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then Audrey placed her hand on his arm, a gesture that seemed both possessive and warning. He straightened his shoulders. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, still not meeting my eyes. Audrey's right. We need our space. You can visit, of course. But living here, it just won't work. Then came the words that would haunt me for months to come. Audrey, looking directly at me with cold eyes, said, Thanks for the house, but we don't need you now. The cruelty of it, the naked calculation, left me breathless. This had been the plan all along. They had never intended to share this home with me. They had played along, encouraged my delusion until the deed was signed and the house legally belonged to Thomas. I don't even remember gathering my things. I moved in a fog, collecting my purse, my jacket. Thomas walked me to the door, murmuring awkward apologies that meant nothing. Audrey remained in the kitchen, already planning how to rearrange the space now that I was leaving. On the doorstep, I turned to look at my son one last time. Where am I supposed to go? I asked him. I sold my house. I spent everything I had on this place. Where do I go now? He had the grace to look ashamed. I'll help you find somewhere, he offered. I can contribute to rent for a while until you get settled. It was too little too late. I walked to my car, tears streaming down my face. As I drove away from the house I had purchased, but would never live in, I felt a hollowness that went beyond heartbreak. This was betrayal in its purest form, from the person I had loved and supported unconditionally for over 30 years. I had nowhere to go, no home, no plan, and very little money left. All I had was the devastating knowledge that my son, the center of my world, had chosen luxury over loyalty, comfort over compassion, his wife's ambitions over his mother's well-being. I drove into the night, a woman who had given everything and received nothing in return. I checked into a budget motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place I would never have stayed in under normal circumstances. The room was clean, but Spartan, with a sagging mattress and thin towels. It felt appropriate somehow, this stark environment that matched my stripped-down circumstances. That first night I barely slept. I kept replaying the events of the evening in my mind, searching for signs I had missed, warnings I had ignored. Had Thomas and Audrey planned this betrayal from the beginning? Or had the decision to exclude me been made later, perhaps influenced by Audrey after the house was secured? In the harsh morning light, I took inventory of my situation. I had approximately $20,000 left from the sale of my house and liquidation of my retirement accounts after purchasing the Brookhaven property. It seemed like a significant sum, until I calculated how quickly it would disappear with motel costs, food, and the eventual need to secure new housing. At 63, with no home and depleted savings, my carefully planned retirement had transformed into a financial nightmare. I called Thomas repeatedly throughout that first day. Each call went straight to voicemail. I left messages, my voice breaking, as I asked him to reconsider, to honor our original agreement. By evening, I received a text message, "Not even a call, Mom. We should give each other some space right now. I'll contact you in a few days to discuss helping you find an apartment." The casual cruelty of that text, reducing our relationship to a transaction about housing, broke something inside me. I stopped calling. I stopped leaving messages. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to feel anger toward my son, pure and uncomplicated, by maternal justifications or excuses. On the third day at the motel, I received a call from Nancy, my friend from the hospital. I hadn't told anyone about what had happened, too ashamed to admit how completely I had been deceived by my own child. But Nancy knew me too well. Something in my voice during a brief conversation the day before had alarmed her. When I finally broke down and told her everything she didn't say, "I told you so," though she would have been justified. Instead, she immediately insisted that I come stay with her. No more motels, no more isolation. I needed the support of someone who genuinely cared about me. Nancy lived in a comfortable two-bedroom condominium across town. She cleared out her guest room, which had been serving as a home office, and helped me move in my few belongings from the motel. For the first time since the housewarming disaster, I felt a glimmer of stability. The next week passed in a blur of emotion. I alternated between numbness, grief, and rage. Nancy would find me staring blankly at the wall, or suddenly sobbing while folding laundry, or pacing the guest room in the middle of the night, unable to quiet my racing thoughts. Word spread among our former colleagues at the hospital. Soon, a steady stream of visitors arrived at Nancy's condo, bringing casseroles, flowers, and most importantly, their unwavering support. These were people I had worked alongside for decades, people who knew my character and my heart. Their outrage on my behalf was a balm to my wounded spirit. Dr. Williams, a cardiologist I had worked with for years, visited one evening with his wife. After hearing the full story, he suggested I consult with a lawyer. Even if the house was legally in Thomas's name, there might be grounds for a civil case based on verbal agreements and implied contracts. It wasn't about the money, he insisted. It was about justice, about not allowing my son and daughter-in-law to profit from such calculated deception. Initially, I resisted the idea of legal action. Despite everything, Thomas was still my son, my only child, my last connection to Jack. The thought of facing him in court was almost unbearable. But as days passed with no communication from him, my perspective began to shift. This wasn't just about me and my loss. It was about right and wrong, about consequences for actions that caused harm. 10 days after the housewarming, I made an appointment with Harold Jenkins, an attorney recommended by Dr. Williams. Jenkins specialized in elder law and had experience with cases involving financial exploitation of parents by adult children. The term exploitation stung when he used it, but I couldn't deny its accuracy. Jenkins reviewed my situation carefully. The fact that I had willingly put the house in Thomas's name complicated matters legally. However, he explained that courts sometimes recognize implied contracts based on verbal agreements and reasonable expectations, especially in family situations. The fact that I had clearly communicated my intention to live in the guest suite, and that Thomas and Audrey had seemingly agreed to this arrangement, might give us leverage. There's also the matter of undue influence, Jenkins explained. If we can demonstrate that Thomas and Audrey deliberately misled you about their intentions in order to secure the house, that strengthens our position. I provided Jenkins with text messages, emails, and a timeline of conversations regarding the house purchase. He took copious notes, his expression growing increasingly grave. By the end of our consultation, he agreed to take my case on a contingency basis, meaning he would only be paid if we reached a successful settlement. As I prepared to leave his office, Jenkins asked one final question. "Have you considered that legal action will likely sever your relationship with your son permanently?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, a small part of me still hoped for reconciliation for Thomas, to realize the magnitude of his betrayal and make amends. But I also recognized that the son I had raised, the boy who had once loved me unconditionally, seemed to be gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "I don't think there's much of a relationship left to sever," I admitted. "And perhaps consequences are what Thomas needs most right now, even if he doesn't realize it." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "I'll prepare the initial documentation," he said. "But don't file anything yet. Sometimes the mere threat of legal action can motivate a more reasonable approach to resolution." That evening, I sought guidance from a source I had neglected in recent years. I visited Pastor Roberts at the community church Jack and I had attended during our marriage. Though I had stopped regular attendance after Jack's death, absorbed in work and Thomas's needs, the pastor remembered me and welcomed me warmly. I poured out my story in the quiet of his office, from the house purchase to the betrayal to my current uncertainty about legal action. Pastor Roberts listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he didn't immediately offer advice or platitudes. Instead, he asked, "What outcome would bring you peace?" "Leslie, not just legally or financially, but spiritually." The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on survival, on justice, on the practical aspects of my situation, that I hadn't considered the deeper question of what would actually heal my wounded heart. "I want Thomas to understand what he's done," I said finally. "Not just to acknowledge it, but to truly understand the harm. And I want to be secure to have a home again, to not spend my remaining years in fear of poverty. But most of all, I want to find a way forward that doesn't consume me with bitterness. I don't want hatred to be my companion in old age." Pastor Roberts nodded. "That's wisdom speaking," he said. "The desire for justice without vengeance, for accountability without destruction. It's a difficult balance, especially when the hurt comes from someone we love so deeply." He suggested I take time for prayer and reflection before making final decisions about legal action. "The law can address the material aspects of your situation," he said. "But healing your heart, that's a separate journey, one that no court can navigate for you." I left the church feeling oddly lighter, as if naming my deeper desires had somehow made them more attainable. I wasn't ready to forgive Thomas and Audrey, not yet. But I could see a path forward that wasn't defined solely by anger and betrayal. Little did I know that my carefully considered plans, both legal and spiritual, were about to be interrupted by an unexpected development, one that would shift the entire landscape of this painful situation. Exactly 7 days after being thrown out of the house, I had purchased. My phone rang just after 6 in the morning. I was already awake, my sleep patterns disturbed by stress and anxiety. The screen showed Thomas's name, the first direct contact since his dismissive text days earlier. I hesitated, tempted to let the call go to voicemail as payback for his earlier silence. But concern won out, as it always had when it came to my son. What if something was wrong? What if he was hurt? "Mom?" Thomas's voice was frantic, breathless. "We need your help. Something terrible has happened." My heart raced. "Are you hurt? Is someone injured?" No, nothing like that." His voice cracked. "We've been evicted from the house. There are people here, officials with papers. They're saying we have to leave immediately. We don't know what's happening." I struggled to make sense of his words. "Evicted? That's impossible. The house was paid for in full, no mortgage, no liens. There had to be some mistake." I told Thomas to put one of the officials on the phone. After a brief hesitation, I heard rustling as the phone changed hands. "Ma'am, this is Deputy Marshal Wilson. I'm executing a property seizure order issued by Fulton County Court on behalf of Atlantic Trust Bank. The current occupants are being given 1 hour to collect essential personal belongings before the property is secured." I bombarded the deputy with questions. How could a bank have a claim on a house that was purchased outright? What legal basis could there possibly be for such an action? The deputy, to his credit, was patient but firm. "Ma'am, I'm just executing the court order. According to our documents, the property was used as collateral for a substantial loan taken out by Thomas Bradford approximately 5 weeks ago. That loan is now in default, and the bank is exercising its legal right to seize the collateral." My mind reeled. A loan collateral. Thomas had taken out a loan against the house almost immediately after it was put in his name without telling me. But why would he do such a thing? And how could he have defaulted so quickly? I asked to speak with Thomas again. His breathing was erratic, as if he were on the verge of a panic attack. "Mom, please come. We don't know what to do. They're only letting us take what we can carry." "Where's Audrey?" I asked. She's upstairs throwing things in suitcases. She's... His voice lowered. She's not handling this well. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the hurt, I couldn't ignore my son's distress. I'll be there as soon as I can, I promised. Nancy was already awake when I emerged from the guest room. She took one look at my face and knew something significant had happened. When I explained the situation, her expression cycled through shock, anger, and grim satisfaction. "So they mortgaged the house you bought them, and now they've lost it?" she asked, incredulous. "And their first response is to call you for help." I shrugged helplessly. "He's still my son," I said. Nancy's eyes softened. "I know. And you're still the same Leslie who would give her last dollar to someone in need." She reached for her car keys. "I'm driving you. You're in no state to be behind the wheel." The drive to Brookhaven was tense. Nancy maintained a diplomatic silence, but I could feel her disapproval radiating like heat. She had watched me sacrifice for Thomas for decades, often at the expense of my own well-being. In her view, this current crisis was simply the culmination of a long pattern of exploitation. As we turned onto the street, I gasped. There were 2 police cars and a black SUV parked in front of the house. Thomas and Audrey stood on the front lawn, surrounded by hastily packed suitcases and boxes. Audrey was gesticulating wildly, her face contorted with anger, while Thomas seemed to have collapsed in on himself, shoulders hunched, head bowed. Nancy parked across the street, and I hurried toward my son. Up close, he looked terrible, his face pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed. Audrey, by contrast, was incandescent with rage, her expensive makeup unable to conceal the fury distorting her features. "What happened?" I asked Thomas, ignoring Audrey's glare. Before he could answer, a man in a suit approached us, introducing himself as Mr. Reynolds from Atlantic Trust Bank. He explained that he was there to oversee the property seizure and secure the premises once the former occupants had removed their essential belongings. I identified myself as Thomas's mother and asked for a more detailed explanation of the situation. Reynolds hesitated, looking to Thomas for permission to discuss the matter. My son nodded weakly. "Mr. Bradford took out a home equity loan against this property 5 weeks ago," Reynolds explained. The loan was for $2.5 million, representing approximately 80% of the property's assessed value. The first payment was due last week and was not received. Given the size of the loan and certain risk factors, our policy is to move quickly to protect the bank's interests. I struggled to absorb this information. The house I had purchased for just over $3 million had been used to secure a massive loan almost immediately after the title transferred to Thomas's name. And somehow that loan was already in default after just 1 month. "What risk factors?" I asked. Reynolds glanced uncomfortably at Audrey. "I'm not at liberty to discuss all the details, but there were concerns about credit history and previous financial obligations that placed this loan in a high-risk category." Audrey's credit history, I realized. There had been signs I had ignored: comments about her shopping habits, Thomas's occasional stress about bills despite his good salary. I had dismissed these as the normal adjustments of a young couple establishing themselves. Now I wondered if there was a deeper pattern of financial irresponsibility I had missed. I turned to Thomas. "What did you do with the loan money?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Audrey's brother Jeremy," he started. "He had this investment opportunity, a development project in Florida. It was supposed to double our money within 6 months. Everyone said it was a sure thing." Audrey interrupted, her voice shrill. "It wasn't Jeremy's fault. How was he supposed to know the environmental survey would find that stupid endangered bird? The whole project got shut down by government bureaucrats." I looked from Thomas to Audrey, trying to comprehend the magnitude of their foolishness. They had gambled the house on a speculative real estate venture, likely without proper due diligence, and lost everything within weeks. Deputy Wilson approached our group. "I'm sorry, but the hour is almost up. You'll need to finish gathering your belongings and vacate the property." Audrey rounded on him. "This is outrageous. Do you know who my father is? You can't throw us out on the street like common criminals." The deputy remained professionally detached. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. The court order is valid and I'm required to execute it. You're welcome to contest it through proper legal channels, but right now you need to finish collecting your essential items." Audrey stormed back into the house, shoving past the second deputy who stood at the door. Thomas remained frozen on the lawn, surrounded by their possessions, looking utterly lost. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: anger at their reckless behavior, satisfaction that their scheme had backfired so spectacularly, but also genuine concern for my son, who appeared to be in a state of shock. No matter what he had done, he was still the baby I had carried, the child I had raised, the last living connection to Jack. Mom Thomas's voice broke. "We have nowhere to go. Can we stay with you? Just until we figure things out?" Before I could respond, Nancy stepped forward from where she had been observing silently. "Leslie is staying in my guest room," she said firmly. "There's no space for additional people." Thomas looked at her in confusion, then back to me. "You're not at your house. Where are you living?" The irony of his question would have been comical if it weren't so painful. "I don't have a house anymore, Thomas," I reminded him quietly. "I sold it to buy this one. Remember? The one you just lost." His face crumpled in shame, but before he could respond, Audrey reappeared, dragging a designer suitcase behind her. Her expression changed when she saw me, calculation replacing anger. "Leslie," she began in the falsely sweet tone I had come to recognize as manipulation. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure we can work something out. My father's attorney will straighten this whole thing out, and then everything will go back to normal." I regarded her silently, noting how quickly she had pivoted from fury to charm when she realized I might be her only immediate solution. In that moment, I saw her clearly, for perhaps the first time, not as my son's wife, or the mother of my potential grandchildren, but as a deeply selfish person who had consistently used and discarded people according to their usefulness to her. The bank representative checked his watch pointedly. 2 minutes, he announced. Audrey's facade cracked slightly. "Leslie, please, we need somewhere to stay. Just for a few days until Daddy's lawyer fixes this mess." I looked at Thomas, still silent and defeated amid their scattered possessions. My son, who had once been the center of my world, who I had sacrificed everything for, who had repaid me with betrayal and rejection. And yet, despite everything, I still loved him. That love was damaged, wounded, almost beyond recognition, but not entirely extinguished. "This is what I'm going to do," I said finally. "I'm going to get a hotel room. One room. Thomas can stay there if he wishes. Audrey, I suggest you call your father." Audrey's face flushed with indignation. "One room. That's absurd. We need space privacy." Nancy stepped forward again. "Beggars can't be choosers," she said bluntly. "Leslie is being more generous than either of you deserve." The deputies began to motion everyone toward the street. The hour was up. The dream house, my retirement investment, Thomas and Audrey's luxury home, was now the property of Atlantic Trust Bank, lost to recklessness and greed. As we walked away from the house, I heard Audrey's angry voice behind me. "This is all your fault, Thomas. If you had invested the money like Jeremy said, exactly like he said, we wouldn't be in this mess." Thomas's weary response was barely audible. "Please stop, Audrey. Just stop." In that exchange, I heard the first cracks in their relationship, the initial fractures that would soon break it apart completely. And strangely, despite everything they had put me through, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for all that had been lost, all the broken dreams and damaged relationships that lay scattered around us like the hastily packed belongings on the lawn of the house that was no longer ours. 1 year has passed since that terrible housewarming day when I heard the words that shattered my world. "Thanks for the house, but we don't need you now." In that year, I've experienced the deepest betrayal and the most unexpected redemption. I've lost nearly everything material, but gained immeasurable wisdom about family love and resilience. The legal battle with Atlantic Trust Bank proved more successful than we had dared hope. Harold Jenkins discovered multiple procedural violations in how the bank had processed both the loan and the foreclosure. After 6 months of negotiations, we reached a settlement that returned approximately $800,000, a fraction of the house's value, but enough to give me a fresh start. I used that money to purchase a small two-bedroom condominium in a quiet community designed for active seniors. It's nothing like the luxury home in Brookhaven, but it's mine free and clear. No mortgage, no vulnerability to anyone else's financial decisions. For the first time in years, I have true security and independence. Thomas's divorce from Audrey was finalized 4 months ago. As expected, her family pushed for a quick, quiet resolution, eager to distance themselves from the financial scandal. Audrey returned to Connecticut, reportedly working at her father's investment firm and dating the son of one of his business associates. She never apologized or acknowledged her role in what happened, but I've made peace with that. Some people are incapable of that kind of self-reflection. Thomas has changed in ways I never expected. Weekly therapy sessions helped him confront the insecurities and weaknesses that had made him vulnerable to Audrey's manipulation and willing to betray his own mother. He moved into a modest apartment, took on additional architectural projects to increase his income, and committed to repaying me symbolically, if not completely, for what I had lost. Each month, Thomas deposits money into my account. It will take decades at this rate to approach the value of what was lost, but the act itself matters more than the amount. It represents his ongoing commitment to making amends, to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of accountability rather than entitlement. Our relationship has evolved into something new, something neither of us could have imagined a year ago. We see each other weekly, sometimes for dinner at my condominium, sometimes for coffee between his work appointments. Our conversations are more honest than they've been since he was a teenager. We discuss difficult topics, acknowledge painful truths, celebrate small victories in our respective journeys of healing. I've made new friends in my community, women who have experienced their own losses and betrayals, their own unexpected life transitions. We gather for book club meetings, volunteer at the local elementary school's reading program, take water aerobics classes together. These connections lack the intensity of blood ties, but offer a steadiness and reciprocity I now recognize was missing in my relationship with Thomas. My part-time nursing position has become a source of unexpected joy. Working with outpatients, many of them elderly themselves, allows me to use my decades of experience in a less physically demanding environment. My colleagues respect my knowledge, patients appreciate my empathy, and the routine gives structure to days that might otherwise be consumed by dwelling on the past. The greatest change, however, has been internal. I've learned to love my son without being defined by that love, to maintain boundaries that protect my well-being, while still offering genuine connection. I've learned that helping others doesn't require sacrificing myself, that generosity without limits isn't truly generosity, but something more complex and potentially harmful. Thomas continues his own journey of growth and accountability. He was promoted at his firm, taking on more challenging projects with increasing responsibility. He joined a community volunteer group that builds affordable housing, using his architectural skills to benefit those in need. Most importantly, he continues to examine his choices and values, striving to become a man of integrity rather than appearance. Last month, Thomas asked if he could bring someone to our weekly dinner. Her name is Monica, a pediatric physical therapist he met through his volunteer work. She is nothing like Audrey, modest in her appearance and aspirations genuine in her interactions. Over dinner, she asked questions about my nursing career, listened attentively to my answers, helped with the dishes without being asked. Thomas watched our interaction with visible relief and happiness, aware of how significant this simple, respectful connection was in the context of our history. As I reflect on this year of profound change, I've come to understand that family relationships, like all relationships, must be based on mutual respect and reciprocity to be truly healthy. The unconditionality of parental love is beautiful, but can become destructive when it enables harmful behavior or self-sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. I still love my son deeply, perhaps more authentically now that I see him clearly, flaws and strengths alike. I still hope for his happiness and success, but I now recognize that his journey is his own, distinct from mine, and that the most loving thing I can do both for him and myself is to maintain healthy boundaries while offering genuine support and connection. The painful lessons of this past year have taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. Material possessions, even beautiful homes in exclusive neighborhoods, are ultimately replaceable. Trust once broken can be rebuilt, but only through consistent actions over time. And most importantly, it's never too late to reclaim your sense of self-worth, to establish the boundaries that protect your dignity, to create a life that reflects your true values rather than others' expectations. So, to those of you watching who may be facing your own betrayals or difficult family situations, I offer this hard-won wisdom: love deeply, but wisely, give generously, but not at the expense of your own well-being. And remember that it's never too late to begin again, to rebuild from the ashes of what was lost into something new and perhaps more authentic than what came before. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a major betrayal? How did you balance forgiveness with self-protection? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support this channel. Remember, our greatest challenges often become our greatest teachers. Thank you for sharing this journey with me.